Hey everyone! It began on an unusually quiet Friday in Moscow. The autumn air was crisp, the sky a pale silver, and the heart of the Russian capital, usually filled with the hum of traffic and the echo of church bells, was overtaken by a different sound. Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! The call to prayer drifted through the cold air, soft yet commanding, resonating across Red Square. Crowds began to gather, men, women, and children from every corner of the vast Russian Federation. Chechnya, Tatarstan, Dagestan, Siberia, even the Arctic North. By noon, the city had transformed into a sea of worshippers. And standing among them, to the astonishment of the world, was President Vladimir Putin himself. He wore a simple black coat and a white cap, no political stage, no royal guard, no distance between him and the people. The president stood shoulder to shoulder with ordinary citizens, his eyes lowered, his hands folded in silent reflection. As the imam began the sermon, a profound stillness fell over the crowd. Journalists from around the world, from CNN to Al Jazeera, watched in disbelief. It was not a press event, it was not politics, it was faith. For the first time in modern Russian history, one commentator whispered on live television, the nation's leader is joining the people in the largest Friday prayer ever held in Moscow. The rhythmic recitation of the Quran echoed across the Kremlin walls, blending with the wind. Soldiers, students, merchants, and scholars bowed together in unity. It was a sight that transcended religion, a moment of humanity, humility, and history. When the imam's voice rose again, Allahu Akbar, the entire crowd moved as one. 1,000,000 souls bowing, heads touching the ground of the Red Square, where tsars once ruled and revolutions once raged. And there, in the first row, Putin bowed too. Hours before the historic prayer began, Moscow witnessed a rare scene. President Vladimir Putin left the Kremlin on foot. No grand convoy, no flashing lights, only a small entourage and a trail of cameras struggling to keep up. The destination? The Moscow Cathedral Mosque, one of the largest in Europe, its golden dome glinting beneath the pale sun. As he approached, the streets were lined by thousands of Muslims waving green flags and whispering prayers. Some were crying, others simply stared in awe. They had seen Putin address parliaments and armies, but never walk humbly toward a house of worship. Inside the mosque's courtyard, a group of imams awaited him. The air was filled with the soft hum of Quranic recitation, verses about justice, mercy, and unity. Putin paused, removed his shoes, and stepped onto the marble floor. The moment was electric. Cameras clicked, but the president's expression was calm, almost contemplative. He turned to the gathered crowd and spoke softly. Islam is not foreign to Russia. It is part of our history, our culture, and our soul. The Muslim people are not outsiders. They are the blood and bone of this nation. Today, we stand together, not as politicians and citizens, but as people of faith. His words were simple, but their impact was seismic. Within minutes, they echoed across news networks worldwide. In Istanbul, Jakarta, Cairo, and Grozny, Muslims gathered around screens, some whispering, Subhanallah, others simply watching in stunned silence. The president of Russia, a nation often portrayed as distant from religion, was acknowledging Islam not as a minority faith, but as a pillar of Russian identity. For many, it was more than politics. It was a sign of something changing, a quiet bridge being built between worlds that had long stood apart. And as the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, rose once more over Moscow, the city that had once symbolized the power of empire, now echoed with a different kind of strength. faith. When the final echoes of the prayer faded into the crisp Moscow air, the crowd remained still, reluctant to move, as if aware they had just witnessed history. Cameras zoomed in on the Russian president, who now stood facing the microphones, his expression solemn yet serene. Then he spoke, not as the calculating statesman the world had come to know, but as a man stripped of pretense. "As long as I lead this nation," he began, "no Muslim in Russia will be persecuted for their faith. Islam is not an enemy. It is a source of morality, discipline, and peace. In a world torn apart by greed and hypocrisy, faith is what keeps the heart of a nation alive." His voice was steady, yet it carried an undertone of conviction rarely seen in modern politics. Behind him, the golden dome of the mosque glimmered under the late afternoon light, a symbol of something larger than words. For a moment, the crowd erupted in "Allahu Akbar," the sound rippling across the square like a wave. Putin simply nodded, hands clasped before him, letting the moment speak for itself. Political analysts scrambled to interpret his statement. Some saw it as a strategic move, a gesture to strengthen Russia's ties with the Muslim world. Others believed it was something deeper, a man who had glimpsed the spiritual vacuum of modern civilization and recognized the power of faith to fill it.
In private circles, whispers began to spread. Was Putin preparing to establish a new international Islamic studies center in Moscow? Would Russia, long defined by Orthodox Christianity and Soviet history, now open its arms to Islam as an equal pillar of national identity? No one knew for certain. But one thing was clear. The speech had shifted something, not just in politics, but in perception. That night, the world watched replay after replay of the event. The Russian president, standing beneath the crescent and the dome, declaring unity in faith and humanity, a scene that defied expectations, ideologies, and decades of Cold War imagery. And while the news anchors debated motives, millions of ordinary Muslims from Morocco to Malaysia simply smiled, whispering the same phrase over and over. Perhaps, at last, a leader has remembered God. By evening, the footage had circled the globe. From New York to New Delhi, from Doha to Dakar, every major news outlet carried the same headline: Putin joins the largest Friday prayer in Russian history. In cafes across Istanbul, the televisions were tuned to Al Jazeera, showing aerial shots of Red Square blanketed by rows of worshippers. In Jakarta, university students watched the same images on their phones, whispering disbelief. In Cairo, the imams of Al-Azhar paused between lessons to replay the video once more, the moment when a world leader bowed his head alongside a million believers. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Putin prays and Moscow Juma trended across platforms, while Muslim scholars and activists from around the world posted messages of astonishment and hope. "This moment will be remembered," wrote one Turkish commentator. A nation that once silenced the call to prayer now amplifies it from its own capital. In the West, reactions were mixed. Some analysts dismissed it as political theater, an attempt to strengthen alliances with Muslim-majority nations. But others, more introspective, saw it as a reflection of a deeper truth, that even in the corridors of power, the hunger for spiritual grounding had returned. Inside the Kremlin, aides reported that letters were flooding in, not from diplomats, but from ordinary citizens. A Christian woman from St. Petersburg wrote, "For the first time, I saw faith bringing people together, not dividing them." A Muslim student from Kazan simply said, "He made us feel seen." Meanwhile, in Chechnya, mosques held special prayers of gratitude. In Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, imams spoke of a turning point in Russian history. And in Palestine, a small boy watching the broadcast with his father whispered, "He's not afraid to pray." The symbolism was undeniable. A global power, one so often defined by its secular, strategic identity, had momentarily stepped into the realm of the sacred. That night, as news anchors debated motives and theologians pondered meaning, one truth became clear. The world had seen something it could not unsee. A leader kneeling in humility, not in conquest. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the Kremlin, lights still burned late into the night. Reports whispered that President Putin had asked his advisors to prepare something new, something called the Initiative for Spiritual Dialogue and Global Ethics. No details were released, no statements followed, only silence and the lingering echo of the adhan over Moscow. Night settled over Moscow. The city that once pulsed with the rhythm of ambition now hummed with something softer, serenity. The golden dome of the Moscow Cathedral Mosque glowed against the deep blue sky, its light reflecting on the quiet streets below. The sound of footsteps had faded, replaced by a calm wind that carried faint echoes of the day's prayer. Inside the mosque, hundreds of candles flickered. Some worshippers remained behind, not to take photos, but to sit in silence, to breathe in the moment. They whispered verses of gratitude, eyes still wet with tears, hearts unable to believe what they had witnessed only hours before. On the upper balcony, away from the cameras, President Vladimir Putin stood by a window overlooking the courtyard. He was alone now. No aides, no generals, no journalists. Just the distant murmur of prayers and the city lights stretching beyond the horizon. He watched the worshippers below, then turned his gaze upward, toward the crescent moon rising over the Kremlin towers. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost in a whisper, he spoke to no one in particular. Strength without faith is emptiness. Power without humility is ruin. Perhaps this, he said quietly, is what Russia truly needs. Later that night, a statement from the Kremlin was released. A new initiative, the Russian Center for Spiritual Dialogue and Global Ethics, would be established in partnership with scholars from Egypt, Malaysia, and Turkey. Its mission, to promote understanding among faiths, combat extremism, and nurture moral education across the Federation. The announcement was brief, the tone understated, but to millions it meant everything. It was not about politics anymore. It was about identity, redemption, and the rediscovery of soul. Around the world, Muslims and non-Muslims alike replayed the images, the sea of worshippers, the sound of the adhan over Red Square, the moment a world leader battled beside his people. Historians would later debate its meaning. Some would call it symbolism. Others would see it as strategy. But for those who were there, those who heard the echo of Allahu Akbar beneath the Kremlin walls, it was something more profound, a beginning. In the early hours of dawn, as the first light crept over the domes and spires of Moscow, a single voice rose again from the mosque. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. The call to prayer drifted over the silent city, a sound once rare, now embraced. And in that fragile stillness between night and morning, one truth lingered in the cold air. Faith had returned to the heart of Russia.